Okay, good morning, everyone. Morning. Do you enjoy Ignite so far? Okay, we can definitely do better than that. You sounded like Swiss neutral people, and thank you. So we do that better. Did you enjoy Ignite so far? That's awesome. That's awesome. So in this session, which is called Integrating Cloud Technologies, which is part of the modernizing server infrastructure learning path, we're going to have a look how Tailwind Traders can make their on-prem infrastructure better by connecting them up to Azure hybrid services. First of all, I have some sad news. I was not allowed to bring any chocolate to my session, like to give away, like some Swiss chocolate. And as we all know, that's probably the best in the world. But I did bring stickers. So we have some awesome hybrid cloud stickers after the session. Come by and grab some if you want to. Now, what you also know, instead of like introducing me, I usually like to talk a couple of seconds about Switzerland and like teach people a little bit about Switzerland. We're going to do that. And then we start with the real session. So let's bear with me. So Switzerland has obviously a lot of mountains. We have watches, cheese, and chocolate. So yeah, that's basically it. So we're done with that. I often get asked by people like, so how is Switzerland going for you? How is living in Switzerland? And I tell them usually, well, the flag is a big plus. It took a while. Awesome. So this is actually not a fake. This is actually what they hang up in Switzerland at 1st of August, which is kind of like 4th of July in the US. And you can see how big that thing is. You can see here the people hanging it. So it's quite big and quite scary. I'm not doing that, by the way. The other thing is we also have an Air Force, by the way. They sometimes fly over the wrong places, so they're not good in navigation. They do this awesome flying stuff, but yeah. To make it even more awkward, they were flying over a yodeling festival. Like, of course, it's Swiss, right? But no worries. They only are operating during business hours anyway, so that's fine. Actually, a true story. So, okay. So let's get started with the session. Before we start, some housekeeping. All the resources, all the slide decks and information, how you set those things up, you can find on that on those online resources. If you have more questions, just as always, hit me up on Twitter, and you can ask for more. So in this session, again, we're going to have a look like how our company, Tailwind Traders, is using hybrid cloud technology to make their on-premises environment even better. And we do a couple of things. So first, we will have a look at hybrid cloud in general. We will then have a look at the different challenges Tailwind Traders has, which they try to solve using hybrid cloud. And then we're actually going to see a couple of those services, how do we connect them and make it easy basically to use those services and how they offer a benefit to that. And for that, we're going to, for example, use products like Windows Server and Windows Admin Center. However, those things I'm going to show you, they also work in some cases with Linux, and you don't even need to use Windows Admin Center. You can also just deploy it, but Windows Admin Center makes it really, really easy to deploy. And then last thing, and I had to hide that for a bit until Monday, we're going to have a look how you can then actually manage the whole infrastructure using Azure Arc. So getting that cloud-native management capabilities from Azure, which we use for Azure Virtual Machines and other Azure resources, to bring that on-prem. And we're going to also have a look at that at the end and how Tailwind Traders can basically do that, use Azure Arc for servers. So let's start a little bit with the challenges Tailwind Traders has. And as we all know, as you probably also saw in this week, running services on servers and even with cloud and more, it doesn't really get easier, right? It gets more complex. Think about the thousands of apps you're going to manage across on-prem, like legacy apps, but also new cloud-native apps which run in the cloud. They do run on different infrastructures. They can run in your own data center. They run on the edge. Think about stores. They also run in other cloud providers, right? So some departments of Tailwind Traders, for example, they decided to move some parts to another cloud provider and not just use Azure, right? And I want to bring that all together with our hybrid management technologies. So these are the challenges we're going to have a look at. So first, we're going to have a look at disaster recovery and how Tailwind Traders can basically protect their on-prem environment by replicating their virtual machines to the cloud. We're then going to have a look at what the problem is actually with keeping virtual machines up to date across your different environments and different operating systems and so on. The third one we're going to have a look at is how actually we can make our file server challenges better. So as you probably all people who have ever administrated file servers, there are a couple of challenges with that. How do I keep them in sync? Like if I have multiple locations, right? How to make sure that I always have enough space. I think I never met someone who actually cleaned up a file server. And they removed old files. Like a user who removed old files because they were not needed anymore. I think I never saw that. And then the last one is how we can actually make sure that all of our servers are basically organized and governed across all our environments. Again, running on-prem, running in Azure, running at other service providers, running at the edge. So we're going to have a look at how Tailwind Traders will do that. Does that sound good? OK, perfect. So first question. How does Tailwind Trader make sure that they have a better disaster recovery strategy, right? Disaster recovery can be a very challenging and very complex thing if we look at it. So let's have a look at the challenges Tailwind Traders is facing. First of all, it's not free, right? Disaster recovery always comes with a cost. There can be licensing costs for the software, but there can also be costs of just having another data center you can actually replicate to. And then we have complexity. Think about Tailwind Traders as a company who runs multiples of stores and has multiple locations, and they need to replicate virtual machines or storage from one location to the other, and they need to make sure that it's close by, but then which side does now replicate to the other side, and keeping track of that is very, very difficult. So we try to basically have a look at that, how they can make that easier, and for that we have a quick demo here. By the way, who has heard of Azure Site Recovery before? OK, a couple of hands, like 50% of the room. So that's what we're going to use for this. So we are here in the demo environment, and we're going to use Windows Admin Center to configure that. If you haven't seen Windows Admin Center yet, it's a free download. If you run Windows Server, you can just go out and download it, and it gives you this web-based management experience. You can run that on-prem. You don't need to connect anything to the cloud if you don't want to, if that's not your company strategy, but you can use that directly. So Tailwind Traders decided to install that on-prem to manage their environment. And what we're going to do here, we're connected to a Hyper-V server. And you can see on the left side, we have these things called extensions. And if we scroll down to virtual machines, you can now see that we have a summary on what virtual machines are running here. And if I go to inventory, you can see here that I have 4 virtual machines, the app servers. So let's have a look at app 2. And app 2, we want to protect by replicating it to the cloud. So we go down, we say protect VM. And then you can see here, it already selected my Azure subscription, my location, because I did a setup for that host already. It does say, OK, this is the recovery vault. And now I basically just select the storage account I want the VM to replicate. And if I click protect VM, it will start replicate that virtual machine to Azure. Because that takes a while, I already did one. So I created app 1, which is, you can see here, already protected. And if I click on that link, it will open up the Azure portal to the site recovery vault that virtual machine is in. You can see here I have my app 1. It says replication is healthy and status is protected. That's how it should be, right? So if we go to that VM, you can see here again some more information like replication health, status, but you can also see the RPO like when did the last replication basically occur. We have to do a couple of other things. So Azure Site Recovery is very smart in detecting, for example, the name, but we need to tell them, for example, which resource group we're going to use. It also detected automatically the matching VM size, the closest matching one. And then we also need to say, okay, which virtual network we're actually going to connect that virtual machine to. I'm not going to do that right now because it would take too much time. But then we can use things like planned failover, or test failover. And let's start a little bit talking about that, what I can now do. So what I did is replicating that virtual machine, or this Tailwind Traders virtual machine, to Azure. And we now have that replica there. And we can now do a test failover, because you don't want to test if the failover technology or disaster recovery technology is working when you actually have a disaster. You want to know that before, and you want to make sure that it's working. So what we can do is we can do a test failover, which will create a virtual machine in a completely different virtual network. It will start up, and it's completely isolated from production, and you can actually check out if everything is working and if everything is fine. You can also do a failover. So that's what you would do if something goes down, like on that Hyper-V host 01, for some reason that is not reachable anymore, it's down, the whole location is down. We can just go and press failover. It will start up that virtual machine in the virtual network we configured, and all the services are running again. We also have the option to run a planned failover. And a planned failover basically gives me the option to, like, for example, if I do maintenance, right? So Tailwind Traders wants to do maintenance tomorrow in their data center, but they want to keep up that server running. They decided Azure is the right place to do that for that temporary maintenance in the data center. So they go and say planned failover. What will happen is it will shut down the virtual machine on-prem. It will synchronize the latest changes, so we don't have any data loss at all, and then start up the virtual machine in Azure and can use it there. So that's how we actually protect Tailwind Traders environment by using Azure Site Recovery. So if I go back, a little bit more on Azure Site Recovery. Azure Site Recovery does not just support Hyper-V Server with Windows Admin Center. It also supports VMware environments, like if you use vCenter or not. You can basically just go and replicate virtual machines from any resource to Azure. That's one thing Azure Site Recovery does, and that's what I just showed you on a Hyper-V server. Azure Site Recovery can also be just used as the control plane. Like, there are some orchestration tools in there. If you do a failover of multiple virtual machines, you can use it to basically have a startup order. And you can replicate those virtual, and make sure that you just need to start that recovery plan and fail over hundreds of virtual machines in a specific order. And then you can use that orchestrator also to replicate from on-prem to on-prem. So if you want to say, okay, look, we have a primary site and a secondary site, but I want to have that orchestration from Azure, then you can do that as well. So no data gets replicated to Azure, but you can use the orchestration engine. And again, we also support VMware. We use Windows and Linux virtual machines there. So now we have protected, or Tailwind Traders has protected their on-prem virtual machines by replicating those to Azure. Another thing which is very important is that we keep them up to date and make sure that they have the latest patches installed. And if not, we want to know why a virtual machine, for example, is not patched. So how do we make sure that the Tailwind Traders environment is patched? There are a couple of challenges with update management, as you might experience, right? We have physical machines, we have virtual machines. They run on-prem, they run in the cloud. They can basically run everywhere. Think also about like stores where you have those virtual machines running, where you run some software there to manage the store. And then they can be Linux and Windows, and usually what you end up is having multiple management tools for that. So we need to make sure that Tailwind Traders can actually see that all the virtual machines across their environment are compliant. They also have they also want to have a centralized software update solution, right, to basically patch all the virtual machines. And with Azure Update Management, Tailwind Traders can address that. So what Azure Update Management does, it does not just work for Azure Virtual Machine, it works also for on-prem virtual machines, and it can go out and check if all the machines I'm running, all the servers I'm running are compliant and have all the patches installed. It can then also go and say, okay, look, this virtual machine or this server is not compliant. So we can also go and basically go out directly from update management and go and patch that server. And the last one is it keeps the Tailwind Traders environment simple, right? As of today, they use basically an on-prem solution to patch their servers, but they're also going to use a version in the cloud. But with that, they get a single pane of glass. So let's have a look at that. So here we are in the Azure portal, in the update management solution in our automation account. And I already here, as you can see, added a Azure virtual machine. And it says that virtual machine is compliant. I can then also go and add other Azure virtual machines. And then I can also say, OK, I want to add non-Azure virtual machines. And that's what we're going to do right now. But we're not going to do that from the Azure portal. Again, we're going to Windows Admin Center. There is an update extension where we can manage Windows updates on my server. I just click on install and see the missing updates. However, what we want to do is connect it to Azure Update Management. So I'm going to press Update Now. And then I'm going to log in. I'm going to select the Azure subscription, where my update management solution is in. I'm going to use existing resource group, which I already have here. It will then detect the region. And then I can also say, OK, I want to use a log analytics workspace. And then I select the automation account for that. If I don't have that, Windows Admin Center will create those for me. If I create a new one, I can do that directly from Windows Admin Center. So this will now connect that server to update management in Azure. This takes a couple of seconds and minutes to complete. And you can see here now it's configured and the setup is done. And if we then go back to the Azure portal, we can now see here that this virtual machine here, this non-Azure virtual machine, shows up in the portal and it says it's not compliant, right? So let's change that and let's fix that and update that virtual machine by creating a new update deployment. Let's give that a name. Let's call that the on-prem update deployment. I can then go and, for example, add a group of virtual machines. Can also be a dynamic group if I want to, based on, for example, tags. In my case, I'm just going to select the virtual machine now to make things a little bit faster and easier. So I just want to patch now my on-prem virtual machine here. I click OK. Again, I can configure which, for example, updates I want should be installed. I can also include or exclude updates. And now I'm going to schedule it. So I can say, OK, when is actually that update deployment when is that going to run? And I also can create a recurring one. So I can say, OK, this should run weekly or monthly, for example, if I want to do that. I can run pre and post script. And I can also configure the reboot option. As you can see, I think reboot, if required, makes a lot of sense. So let's create that update job or deployment. And this will take a while to run, basically to go out and now goes down and goes to that agent and starts patching that server. If we now have a look here, we can see here the deployment schedules. So you can see here that we have that on-prem deployment here where it goes out. And if we go to history, you can see here when it's done, you can see it succeeded. It took 10 minutes to basically update that server. And if I go, I can see a little bit more details from that update deployment. I can see here patched one virtual machine or one server successfully. And I have 3 updates, basically, which were successfully installed. If I go back now to my machines, you can see now my VM running in Azure, but also my on-prem virtual machines are now both compliant and updated in that environment. So this makes it very easy. Again, I did this now with one server, but you can imagine that I can, of course, patch hundreds of servers at the same time across my environment if I want to. So this is one thing how Tailwind Traders makes their environment simpler. Again, update management. Here's a little bit of a summary on that. It goes out, it assesses the environment. Doesn't matter where the virtual machines are running. It deploys the update, and then again verifies the compliance to do that. It supports multiple operating systems. I showed you the Windows version of it, but obviously you saw that there's also a Linux option for it, so we're also supporting Linux virtual machines on that. If you're running Azure Stack, by the way, it also has a great integration with Azure Update Management. and it will show up as a Azure virtual machine and not a non-Azure virtual machine, because you know Azure Stack and Azure Stack Hub, as it's called today, it now basically allows you to run Azure in the location you want to. So that's why it shows as an Azure virtual machine. Good. So the next challenge we're going to talk about is actually file servers. So Tailwind Traders has multiple locations over the country and also in different countries around the globe. And they want to all use the same files, basically. So how do we get those files synchronized? Who has used DFSR before? Who likes using DFSR? That is a good one. Like a lot of hands, and then as soon as that liked, no hand anymore. Or is there one? Nah. Okay. Yeah, so this is a challenge, and if there only would be something to make this easier, right? So that's what we're going to have a look at. Another big challenge Tailwind Traders is facing is that they have different hardware and all the locations. Some of them, they have like 5 terabytes of storage, some of them 8, but the files are just growing and growing and growing, and they, instead of just buying new hardware and adding new storage, there must be a solution which works better, right? So let's have a look at that, how we can do that. So this is a short overview about the Tailwind Traders environment and how they're going to use Azure File Sync to make their scenario easier. Before I'm going to show you the demo, I want a little bit like show you the environment, how it looks like. So they have a file server called File Server 1 in New York, where they use like users access files and documents. They use work folders and other technologies to access that. Now, what they did, and I'm going to show you that in the demo, they started to synchronize that server to an Azure file share in Azure using Azure File Sync. And this brings now a couple of different benefits. So first of all, they can start using cloud tiering. So they can say, okay, everything which is older than, for example, 2 months gets tiered. It's just as an item there, but it's stored in the cloud only. And we're going to have a look how that can be configured. The next benefit, since it's now an Azure file share, I can basically access it in the cloud, right? So imagine if the server, for example, for some reason I cannot access that file server anymore, I can still access the Azure file share. And with the new Azure file share premium offerings and the new performance offering, they can even get larger if you had a look at this. Now, Azure File Sync also offers me to synchronize now that file server 1 and the files stored on the Azure file share to a second file server running in Seattle. So we're going to have a look how they do that as well. Again, this is just an example. There can be more file servers across the globe. It's not limited to 2. And then we can also take advantage, since we have now all of the files stored on Azure File Share, we can now use Azure Backup to back up that file share and offload the backup operations from the on-prem environment to the cloud. And now, one of the coolest things I think is, if the file server now in Seattle fails, what would I do, right? I would basically need to today I would go and basically find a backup tape or something, or a backup, and go and restore that server and make sure it's there and send everyone home for the day or 2. Now with Azure File Sync, we get that rapid file server recovery. So what we're going to do is we just install a new server, we install the agent, add that again, and it will synchronize all the metadata of all the files. So in a couple of minutes, you can see all the files. They're still stored in Azure. And so when a user then basically goes and opens a file, it will take a little bit longer, but in the background, it will download the file. Now, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but that all sounds a little bit for me like OneDrive for servers, right? So let's have a look at that environment. So here we are on File Server 1. That's the server I just saw, which runs in New York, where they have a file share. Again, a lot of Tailwind Trader documents, and they also have a folder with super important files, and they want to connect that. So they already did the setup for that server. I'm going to show you how that looks like. And then we will add a second server, the server from Seattle, to the same synchronization. So let's have a look at this. Again, here, just so you trust me, we have the files. We also have the super important files. You can see here some hybrid cloud sticker PDF files, and so on. So we synchronize that to Azure. And if we go to the Azure portal, I have an Azure File Sync service here called Tailwind Traders File Server. Very creative name. And if I go in there, you can see here I have different endpoints. I have two endpoints. One is the cloud endpoint, which is an Azure file share. And the other one is a server endpoint, which is our file server running in New York. So you can see here it's a local file share on that server, and that's what we basically sync up to that file share. Now, if we have a look at that file share, and go to the storage account, and here we have the Azure file share, guess what? You will see all those files, including our super important files folder. And so they are synced immediately from basically on-prem to the cloud, and also obviously different way around. So let's have a look how that would work. So just so you trust me that this actually works, we go to server 1, create a new folder here. Let's call it folder 1, because I'm so in a good mood today. And if we now go back to the Azure File Sync, guess what? What server will show up when I hit refresh? It's folder 1, right? So that works. So again, if I create a new file or do changes on files, that works great. So the next thing I want to do is basically onboard our Seattle server. So I can go here, again, to my file sync server in Azure. And let's have a look quickly at the file server itself. You can see here it also has a local file share. This is the blue server, the one in Seattle. And you see here the file share is empty, right? I want to connect that to the existing environment. So what I could do is I could go to the Azure portal and go and add a server endpoint. But first I need to install an agent. And for that we go back to the Windows Admin Center here. Just a quick switch. Just a second, yeah. So let's go Windows Admin Center. Go to File Server 2. And then you see here on the left side, you see the Azure File Sync extension. And this will basically help me to set the whole thing up. So me as a Tailwind Traders admin, I'm going down and say set up. And the first thing, we need to install the Azure File Sync agent. Again, I could also download that from the Azure portal, but I'm using Windows Admin Center, which makes it a lot faster and easier to do that. So let's say deploy agent. Again, this will download and install the agent for me. And after a couple of seconds, it will show up as installed. And the next thing I will need to do is, I will need now to register that server to my Azure File Sync service, or my sync service in Azure, right? I could have multiples across that. So I'm going to log in here. And you can see here I can select my Azure subscription, where my sync service is, my resource group. And then here's the name of the sync service. I'm going to click Next and register server. And now we have registered that server to the sync service. And if we go back to the Azure portal, we can have a quick look how that looks like. Again, it's not in a sync group yet. We just registered it. So you can see here the agent version. And then in the portal, we go now to that sync group I created. Since I can have multiple sync groups, I want to now add that server to that specific one. And you can see here, file server 2 now shows up. I'm going to enter the path. And here, I can now configure cloud tiering. So I can enable it and go out, OK, I want to have at least 20% of free space. But I only want to keep files younger than 60 days. So let's do that. Click Create. And this will now automatically add that server and basically do all the synchronization. Just take a couple of minutes. We took some magic to make it faster. And you can now see my Seattle server has now all the files stored on that server as well. Now, what I can do, obviously, I can create folder 2. And if I now switch back to the Azure portal and go to my Azure file share, you will see spectacular, you see folder 2. And if I go then back to my on-prem server, let's go to the New York server again. If I do a refresh here, you will see folder 2 also on that server, right? So this is the whole scenario, like for replicating file servers across different environments, using the power of Azure and Azure Hybrid Services with Azure File Sync to make their on-prem environment even better. Good. So I showed you now a lot of different things using Windows Admin Center. Again, all these things are also available without Windows Admin Center, but we have a lot more. So if you look at the hybrid integration, we can use that for small deployments, for like, let's say, like also small companies or branch offices. We can also use that in very large deployments, right? You saw me now playing with like 1 or 2 servers, but think about if you have hundreds or thousands of servers, you can do the exact same thing. And you can, again, you cannot just use that on-prem to Azure, but also if you run like VMs in other cloud providers, in multi-cloud, and so on. So we have different things, which I don't have time to talk to, but I want to give you a quick overview what else we can do with Windows Admin Center and the hybrid integration. We can use Azure Network Adapter to create a point-to-site VPN from a system. I showed you Azure Site Recovery. We can also use Azure Backup to backup files from on-prem to Azure for long-term backup. Azure Update Management, Azure File Sync, and also being able to connect Azure Monitor and also newly Azure Security Center. Good. Let's come to the last thing, and I'm super excited to talk about this because it took a long while. It was like very secret project inside Microsoft, and this week the team finally announced it. And we're going to have a look how basically Tailwind Traders can advantage of Azure Arc to make sure that all their servers are meeting their compliant infrastructure, right? If you look at the keynotes, they showed you Azure Arc as a service which you can connect different things. So it can also connect data services, Kubernetes clusters, but I want to show you how Tailwind Traders uses it for servers. So let's have a look at that specific demo. So here I'm in the Azure portal, and I already connected server 1 from the Tailwind Traders environment to Azure. So I'm going to see that already in the portal, and we can have a look at what I actually can do. So here, if I want to go play with that, I just go and type Azure Arc, and then I have here my Azure Arc machines. You can see here server 1, it's connected, and you can see it as a resource group and a subscription. And if I click on it, you can see I have a lot more information. I have like RBAC, I have tags, so I can use all that as I would do for Azure Virtual Machine. And then I can manage access to that resource in Azure, but I can also check out guest configuration policies and see if the virtual machine is compliant. So I can click here, or I can go here to policies. And if you're familiar with guest policies, you can see here that I deploy now these guest configuration policies on that server, and it's compliant. I can also go and add other servers. So if I want to add a server, I can just click on Add. The one way is generating a script. That's what we have a look at. But I can also add virtual machines at scale if I want to, right? Or servers at scale. So let's generate a script. Again, we select a subscription and a resource group and a region where we actually join that server to. And it can be Linux or a Windows server. We can also go and configure a IP, a proxy, if we need. And you can see here I can use tags to tag that resources. And then at the end, you will see it generated the script for me. So what it does is basically a script which downloads the agent, installs the agent, and then registers my server to Azure, and it shows up there. And that's basically it, all I need to do. I can also use Windows Admin Center. So let me go here. If I go to that server and go down to, on the left, to settings, what I can do here, I have Azure Arc for servers. And if I go here, I can just go sign in. And you can see here, this server is already connected. And you can see here which Azure features I can use, like guest configuration policy or log analytics. But again, if I would not have joined that server before, I would run directly from Windows Admin Center through the whole wizard. It would download the agent for me. It would join me to the subscription. It would join me to the right service and make sure I'm there. So the power here from Azure Resource, using that technology, it's not just that I see, again, like I have guest configuration policies, which you can kind of like think as a modern version of group policy to make sure that the environment is compliant. The power is much, much more. There's much, much more which we didn't really enable all of it today, but you can see where it's going. So let me show you a little bit how that looks in the background. So if you look at Azure today, we or Tailwind Traders as an Azure customer, we can use different tools like the portal, we can use shells, CLIs, PowerShell, and so on, and then use different management services in Azure, like for monitoring or updating. And some of them I showed you. Most of them we use for Azure VMs and services, but as I showed you, you can also use them on-prem. And again, today, mostly for Azure resources, and this all is enabled by basically the Azure Resource Manager, right? The Azure Resource Manager gives us a lot of different things. It gives us RBAC, so I can make sure that only the people who are supposed to see the resources are seeing that, or can access that, right? Or can do changes to it. That's one thing. But we also get a lot of other things like tagging and grouping. So if you want to do a governance and basically tag all your servers across your complete environment, and again, I'm not just talking about Azure, I'm talking about multi-cloud or on-prem or virtual machines and servers running at the edge, we can now do that too by extending Azure Resource Manager to different environments. And today, we allow you really basically to connect to servers. So that's what we have in public preview. You can go out and try this. They also showed demos about how you actually would add Kubernetes clusters if you run Kubernetes at the edge or in your data center. So they show up in the Azure portal as well. And the same for Azure Data Services, right? And the good thing is also, that doesn't mean this is just one way, right? Look at it as an additional way you can still use your existing management tools. So if you're using things like System Center and things like that, you can still keep using them. So what is Azure Arc? Again, Azure Arc, we have a look at the server and management, but it really brings Azure services and Azure management to any infrastructure. So wherever Tailwind Traders is running their infrastructure, they can use Azure Arc to connect these servers and using a single pane of glass. And I think that's a very important part to understand, and this was also one of the reasons why Tailwind Traders decided to go with Azure and Microsoft, is because they can use all that stuff together wherever they need it, right? They don't need to move everything to the cloud. They can use different services and operating systems. They can use Windows Server in their on-prem environment. They can use Azure Stack if they need different solutions, like Azure Stack HCI to run their virtual machines on. They can go and deploy IoT devices and connect that up to Azure. And then they also get a management plane with Azure Arc where they can connect all these services, right? So that's a very good story, I think, which we see customers using that. And Tailwind Traders, really, the benefit I showed you, in the first half of my presentation, it was all about, okay, look, I have servers on-prem. How do I make my environment better by connecting them up to Azure? And the second part was really, I'm using Azure now, but how can I use Azure to not just see my Azure resources? How can I take the advantage of all those tools in Azure to manage the on-prem resources as well? So with that, I'm going to wrap up a little bit. What you have seen in that session is I showed you how Tailwind Traders use different Azure hybrid services to make their on-premise environment better. We had a look at disaster recovery and how Tailwind Traders was able to make it easier, less complex for them to have a disaster recovery solution. We had a look how they can keep all their virtual machines, all the physicals and virtual machines up to date and compliant across, again, any infrastructure. And we looked at Azure File Sync and how they actually could replicate their file servers from one location to the other. And then the last thing really, how could they connect up all these Azure resources and how can they basically manage all the resources they have in their environment from one single pane of glass. So if you want to learn more, obviously we have some very good documentation out there on Microsoft Docs. I created a short link here for all the Windows Admin Center hybrid services I just showed you, and much, much more. We also have some documentation now for Azure Arc, which is also out there. Again, you can find that on Docs. There are also some great videos explaining how things are working. And then, if you never heard of it before, Microsoft Learn is our great learning platform, which is free. You can go out and try different Azure services. You can go through labs. It's not just text and videos. You can also do hands-on experience. It will spin up a sandbox for you, which is free, and you can try out Azure services without even having an Azure subscription. And then again, I'm not sure how long you can take the certifications today, but here you can take the certifications. If you haven't had the chance to take the certifications here, you can obviously take that at your local test center or online. And there's some great certifications like the Azure Fundamentals or the Azure Administrator, which I find is very valuable for our audience. Again, free certification exams here at Microsoft Ignite. If you didn't have the chance, again, there are possibilities. You can take them online or at your test center. And then again here, a couple of resources. If you want to have those resources from that session, this is where we keep those. We will also keep that up to date. So while we are going on tour with Microsoft Ignite the Tour, where we do 30 stops across the planet, we will keep that up to date, and we will update our sessions depending on new Azure features and new Windows Server features coming up. The next session in that learning path is MSI20, and it's at 1 p.m. in the same room, and it all goes about migrating IaaS workloads to Azure by Pierre Romand, which is also part of our team. So make sure if you're thinking about migrating to Azure that you join that session. He's really going to walk through how Tailwind Traders will move their workloads to Azure. So with that, I want to say thank you. Again, if you want some stickers, I have some stickers here. If you have any questions, come up and let's have a chat. Thank you very much.